It was at the end of June that Audrey finally told him where he stood. And it isn't going to be at the altar. So he writes to his mother and says, Audrey says how miserable she is to have made me unhappy, and how she can't understand herself, and now she's lost faith in herself. She even said she wasn't good enough for me, he explained to his mother. Oh, Audrey, stop it. Audrey knew all along that she wasn't going to choose him. She's stringing that poor guy along. And then at the end of it being like, I know, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. It's not you. It's not. It's me. I mean, I don't even know how I can trust myself now. That I could do that to you. I mean, it's so bad. I know. Oh, it sucks that I did this. I'm sorry. But I mean, it's just like, I can't let you keep thinking that this is a thing. I mean, you were really into it. And I love that for you. But it just feels like, I don't know. I feel like I'm not being true to myself. But like, I know it's really messed up that like I didn't say something sooner. I'm sorry. Like, you were talking about marriage and stuff and I didn't know what to do about it. So I just didn't say anything yet. But like, I know I've lost faith in myself. Like, I should have said something sooner. I know. But I didn't. But anyway, I'm saying it now. So like, I'm sorry. Good morning, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we are going to be doing chapter 3 of the Mountbattens. Now, this is when Edwina and Dicky finally meet. So you remember in the last chapter, they were both in their sort of college years doing some finishing education, and we got a little bit of them back and forth, never the twain shall meet. But that changes in this chapter. In this chapter, we are also introduced to a very important relationship that has nothing to do with Edwina. The relationship that Dicky has with the Prince of Wales, Edward VIII, known to us as David, after we read Traitor King. The two of them have an incredibly tight relationship beginning in this chapter. It's almost odd how close they are, but not just how close they are, how much they revel in the closeness of each other. Now, you could say that for Dicky, you could forgive him for writing so glowingly and brightly and excitedly to his mother that he has managed to become so close to the Prince of Wales. That is an obvious, exciting thing if you befriend the future king of the British Empire. So I don't fault him. But the way that, first of all, the way that David writes home is wild because it's so childish. And we have to remind ourselves that this is a man in his 30s. The way he writes home is like the most juvenile writing I've ever seen. For a man who seems that he should have had some degree of education, he's not a good speller, which is not the end of the world, but you would just assume that there'd be not so many spelling mistakes. But not that that really matters. I'm really talking more about his tone. His tone is very, very middle school. The way he's just so, and not just a middle school boy, but like a middle school girl. It's weird. Anyway, he revels in this relationship with Dicky. Like, to a degree that it's like, was something else going on here? And I think you guys eventually, look, we already know that there's some shades of interest to this relationship from our previous book, Traitor King. And that didn't really get into it, but I assume we're going to talk a little bit more about things here. I just, look, I don't want to be one of those people who looks back at history and behind every stone is a homosexual relationship, okay? I hate that so much. One, because it's not historically accurate in so many different cases. And two, I really think that it is disgusting how we take our modern morals and our modern mores and our modern cultural moment where everybody is defining themselves by their sexuality and placing that at a time when that, number one, that wasn't your identity. And number two, it wasn't potentially like people weren't just like, testing out their sexuality, Now, again, I didn't live during this time. Maybe people were testing out their sexuality. As I learned from the last book, there's all sorts of things going on at boys' schools that I wouldn't have assumed was just the norm. Like, it wouldn't, in my mind, be like, oh, in the absence of girls, guys get in each other's beds in prison, but you guys have access to the outside world. So I don't know. That was news to me. And of course, we get differing opinions about boys' school. Some people say that it was, it was the hot gossip. And so people overestimate how often it was happening. There's other people who say, oh, it happened all the time. That's the way one boy would exert his power over the others. Probably there's somewhere in the middle there. All of this to say, given the background of Traitor King and what we learned about Edward VIII in that book, given the fact that Dicky has been at a plethora of male boarding schools where homosexuality seemed like it was kind of like a hobby, the relationship that they now have is interesting given that background, given that color to what both of them have experienced thus far. And I'm not saying that Dicky is necessarily, wanting to jump into the bed with David. But what I am saying is the way they revel in this relationship is at a minimum as though they are crushing on each other, And I want to also say this. Sorry for 1,000 caveats before we begin. You can meet people in life who, you don't like have a romantic thing for them, but you admire them so much that it's tantamount to the way you might feel if you met somebody and you were physically and emotionally attracted to them. So I'm not saying that this relationship doesn't fall within the boundaries of admiring somebody so much that you want to spend all your time with them because you just think that they're so awesome and you have such great conversations and it's a lot of fun to be around them. I'm not saying that everything has to be a sexual thing. I'm just saying that the way they gush about each other is maybe not as masculine and maybe not their age. It's very middle school girl about a boy that they like. So anyway, we've got a lot to get into. Let's just get into it. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this book. I know that this style of a historical biography is potentially, people could feel less juicy than, say, the real Diana. And so I fully expected the numbers to drop because people always tune into the juicy gossip. But you guys, when I tell you that my heart is not heavy, but every time I have to pick up this book, I don't feel heavy. And that is not the case for the way I felt with the last book. I dreaded prepping for those. There was something about it that made me feel heavy and cast down. And, I just thank all of you who have shown up, who want to hear really interesting stories about history that we can rely on as being really true. And thank you so much for showing up for a book that maybe doesn't initially seem like it's going to be like hot gossip. And so people think, oh, it's not as fun. But first of all, at least we can read it and feel great. But also, I think we're going to be getting the hot gossip in this book because already, this is so much more interesting to me where we sort of are getting little pieces and it's not like we're not being told how we're supposed to feel about the characters of the book. Love it. Okay, let's just get into this. It's not a super long chapter. I feel like I have been saying that every episode, but these just aren't hour-long episodes so far, which I personally love because it's a lot easier to edit. But let's just get started because I know we have so many things. There's so much in this chapter. So I say it's not a long chapter, but you know me. I can make something, I can make a paragraph like 2 hours. So I got to get into it. Okay, this chapter is called First Loves. And of course, we're talking about Edwina and Dicky, ostensibly. But I also think we're talking about David and Dicky. Because these two, they got a thing for each other. Okay. David, Prince of Wales, was 6 years older than Dicky. And you'll recall from the last chapter that Dicky had finagled his way onto a tour that David was going on. David, Prince of Wales, was 6 years older than Dicky, and had also been educated at Osborne and Dartmouth. He had briefly served in the Navy before some educational travel in Europe, and a brief stint at Oxford. During the First World War, he had held a staff job at Army headquarters, but he never got close to the fighting. After the war, it was decided that as part of his training to be king, he should conduct a series of world tours to demonstrate Britain's gratitude for the contribution of the empire to victory. Good strategy. In 1919, he had visited Canada and the United States, and the trip had been a great success. This new tour would take in Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific, and West Indies, where rumor has it he left a string of children in his wake. That's the other thing. You guys remember from Trader King, we had a whole chapter about all his illegitimate children, some of whom are still living in New Zealand. And, I don't really know where truth is and where rumor lies. That chapter was shrouded in all kinds of questions for me, if you'll recall. But this is when all that happened. Okay, well, what was Dicky's role, though, on this trip? Like, how could he have finagled his way onto the ship? What did they write this down as? Well, he was officially a flag lieutenant to the Prince's Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Sir Lionel Halsey. But, really more practically, he was kind of there as the king's joker. He was supposed to act as a sort of minder to provide the future king with company of his own age, to keep him amused, occupied, and in a happy state of mind. David didn't even want to go on this tour because he was having that deep affair with Frida Dudley Ward. So he didn't want to go on any trips. He wanted to hang out with his girlfriend, which is, as we know, his want. I just want to hang out with my girlfriend. Where's my girlfriend? He goes from Frida Dudley Ward over to Wallace Simpson, and the guy can never manage to do anything that he's supposed to be doing because I just want to hang out with my girlfriend. Well, and you remember Frida Dudley Ward. Remember, she was really cast down because David suddenly had the hots for Wallace Simpson and dropped Frida like a hotcake. And remember, Frida was really upset for her daughter's sake because she said that David had been like a father to her daughter. And David had given her an add a pearl necklace. And then David just didn't add a pearl when he was supposed to every birthday. And how was she supposed to explain that to her little girl? Like, well, maybe just don't have an affair. Maybe let the little girl's real dad buy her an add a pearl necklace. Anyway, that's how things ended there. But at the point that this story is happening, he's all about Frida. Wallace hasn't even entered his pretty little head. So he was cast down as it was because he just wanted to be with his girlfriend. Now, in mid-March of 1920, the party set off. The Prince of Wales immediately wrote to Frida. And you guys will recall that when he wrote to Frida, he would write in baby talk. I'm very scared. I'm having a very hard time without you. It's very hard. So he writes. And of course, you guys, it's David. We're going to bring back the David voice / Harry voice. Dicky's keen and cheery about everything, although of course he's such a baby. But he's a very clever boy, and he goes out of his way to be nice and kind and sympathetic and attentive to me. So I think he guesses a little how I'm feeling. I'm so glad I've got him and me, and I think we're going to be great friends, or as much as our age difference will allow, as of course he's terribly young. But he's been such a help to me today, Angel, and I'm grateful for him. Well, that's the beginning. That is the very beginning of what is going to end up being the most gushing letters about Dicky. Dicky writes to his mother and says, David, I like more and more, the more I see of him. He said, we have long talks before he goes to bed at night in his sleeping cabin and exchange various confidences, mainly affairs of the heart. Poor chap, with all these hundreds of people around him, he's as lonely and homesick as he can be, and is at present hating this trip. He says he'll cheer up later, but then he's very, very badly smitten, I think. Yeah, with that Frida Dudley Ward. Can you imagine having to be the companion to this spoilt man-child who wants to do nothing but cry about his mistress, who he couldn't have anyway, so it's like, well, what are you carrying on for? She's married, it's just like, go sow your wild oats, like run to Australia, New Zealand, go have a boys trip, get out, instead of sitting there crying, shoving your knuckles into your eyes, holding back the tears. What about Frida Dudley? Woo! Yeah, well. Anyway, Mountbatten, meanwhile, kept his mother abreast of his own love life. And you guys, he too was, we've already established that Dicky was young for his age. And that everyone said that about him. Even simple David is like, he's such a baby, but he is. Because in this section, it's like so middle school, I cannot even. He writes to his mother and says, but please, please keep this a secret. Nada has come to the amazing conclusion that Catherine now loves me. Who is Nada and Catherine, we don't know, but probably one of the many. He says, this I still don't really believe her, but I am terribly afraid I'm falling in love with her. Although, if I see Audrey in Panama, it may change things, though on the whole, as far as guts are concerned, I am heart-free, and I shall keep a list of girls I meet on the trip. How good of him. Give himself options. You remember Audrey from the last chapter. She was the illegitimate child of somebody. And he thought she was like hot stuff because of her little eyebrows and her kissable lips. Well, he's about to meet another girl coming up soon. Now, it would seem that there were girls aplenty for him. And There were many, in his parlance, with whom he, quote, got off, as apart from girls met on official functions. Others were just brought out to them, like lambs to the slaughter. These girls that were brought to them, including the daughter of the mayor of San Diego, Lucia Wilde, a general's daughter who later married a prominent Australian politician, her name was Gwenda Grimwad, and Molly Little, a friend of Bertie's mistress, Sheila Loughborough. In June, Peter Murphy wrote to Dicky to keep him abreast of the news, mentioning that there is, quote, a new debutante whom all the young men are mad about. Huge blue eyes, attractive hair, gorgeous figure, lovely legs, just your cup of tea. Her name is Edwina Ashley. And everybody tells me she's very sweet. Was Peter not interested in Edwina for himself? Why would he be telling his other friend, hey, there's a girl you might be interested in. Hey, man, Dicky's gone. Scoop her up for yourself. Anyway, how did these young men who were busy all night long talking about affairs of the heart pass their time during the day? Well, the men passed their time playing deck hockey, clay pigeon, shooting, jumping on pogo sticks, posing for nude photographs, and playing juvenile pranks in between the official program of teas, garden parties, dances, banquets, parades, meeting ex-servicemen, naval, and troop reviews. The Prince of Wales was depressed, bored, and petulant, and only briefly cheered up when the train from Sydney to Perth was derailed, leaving the local Minister of Works trapped in the lavatory. The prince himself was found reclining amid the wreck of the costly compartment, smiling and smoking a cigar, later remarking that, well, at least we have done something which was not on the official program. Okay, here's the deal, you guys. How in the world could he sit there, be petulant, depressed, bored, after a list of all these things? Parties, dances, banquets, parades, jumping on pogo sticks, shooting clay pigeons. Your entire life is one entertainment after another. How could you seriously sit there and be like, it's not enough? Where's Frida Dudley Ward? Where's my girlfriend? Dicky's natural enthusiasm and self-confidence had a calming effect on the highly temperamental prince, but his close friendship led to a lot of jealousies, because as everybody else looked on, who's this newcomer who just showed up? This little kid? He's 6 years younger than the Prince of Wales. Why is he hanging around? Who's this clingers on? How did he get an invitation? And why does David like him so much? Which, by the way, speaking of the name David, Dicky was the only one who was allowed to call him that. So as you can imagine, all the other courtiers are chafing. One guy named Joey Lee, another courtier, always wrote home referring to Dicky as, quote, Dirty Dick, the Hun, and the Boy. As a side note, not that anybody cares, but you know what I really hate? I really hate stupid nicknames for people you don't like. I just don't understand the joy that one gets out of calling somebody a nickname. You do you. If you want to, you can. But I don't get the pleasure of it. Well, Joey Lee did. He loved to call some folks some nicknames. And how was Dicky faring knowing that everybody disliked him? Well, he didn't really mind so much because he was too busy hanging out with David. What does he care if everybody was over here chafing and angry and indignant in the corners? He was pumping David for all kinds of information, and David was giving it. And I'm not saying that Dicky was pumping with him for information with the intent of using it against him, but I think he was just really enjoying getting this close to somebody with this much power and fame. Dicky wrote to his father and told his father that this is very private, but he hates his father and mother, both of them, and misses a father and mother so much. David felt rather sick, so he joined me in my cabin. He never leaves it, save to go on deck. I sleep in his cabin. He loves mine. So you could see that David is making Dicky very indispensable to his happiness. He must have Dicky with him, or else he's just having a bad attitude. Even to the point of being like, let's sleep in the same room together. No, man, that's your room over there. It's like, we can talk, we can stay up late, but you can't come and sleep in my bed. Right? Which clearly Dicky did feel because he got up and slept in David's bed. It's like, all right, David, if you want to camp out in my place, but I'm going to go sleep where you sleep then, And I don't know, David seems very clingy to me. And I think that I would hate that. Maybe for a little while it would be okay, because it'd be interesting, all right, tell me all your things. You hate your parents. That's a tidbit. And you wish that you had a different mom and dad. Okay, all interesting things. But after a while, I'd be like, can I get some space, All right, well, David goes on to write to Frida, and he says of Dicky, as I've told you, Dicky and I have become very close friends, and after all, we are relations, and he knows you, and so means a great deal to me away from you. He writes, the result is that we are more or less inseparable, and are in and out of each other's cabins all day. He's generally in mine.
And when we sleep on deck, our beds are always next to each other! Exclamation point. Well, would you believe it, sweetie, the rest of the staff have for this reason become jealous of him and object to him, and have gone to the Admiral with a long list of what they consider his misdeeds! Exclamation point, exclamation point. Of course, they don't mention a word about me, and our being so in time, but I've just had a long yarn with the Admiral, who has just had a long talk with Dicky.
So he knows why everyone's against him, but he won't he won't bring it up. He won't name the jealousy, but he knows that's why everyone's after Dicky all the day. But I find it weird how excited he is that they sleep next to each other. I'm not saying they're doing anything. It just doesn't seem like a masculine thing to be excited about.
And we bring our beds together, and when we sleep on deck, we sleep right next to each other! Exclamation point, exclamation point.
Well, maybe some people did resent the fact that Dicky and David were close, but there were advantages of that. The Admiral realized that Dicky's closeness could be a useful way of persuading the prince to carry out tasks that he didn't want to do. So if Dicky was like, oh, come on, let's just go do it, David would be like,
all right, I suppose so.
Halsey had asked Dicky to keep an unofficial record of the trip designed for an inner circle of courtiers. Dicky tried to keep it lighthearted and felt able to share it with his mother, brother, and the prince's brother Bertie, but there was a brief furor when the official photographer, Ernest Brooks, disappeared with a copy and was tracked down to a London restaurant, Kettner's, where he was caught trying to sell it to an American journalist for £5,000. We had trouble even back then. Dicky had usurped the Prince of Wales' younger brother Bertie as confidant. In a letter to his mother, Mountbatten wrote, "He told me that before he came out, his best friend was Bertie, but what a useless fellow is a true friend. He's a dear, good, stupid, pompous, and faithful old soul, as David himself describes him. But as for his having a good effect on David, it's all the good that's going out of David into him. I don't know if I've ever told you before exactly what friends David and I are. I've told him more about myself, and he's told me more about himself than either of us has ever told anyone in our life before." It's almost like they're in love. I mean, I'm not saying that they are, and I hope that I'm not presuming too much by stating how interesting I find this evolving closeness. And I certainly think that David was more gushy about it than Dicky. And for Dicky, I can understand why he'd be excited about this close relationship. But I don't know. I think this, huddling up in your cabin, telling each other everything you've never told anybody is interesting. But I'm not a guy. Maybe, do you guys have relationships like that where, you cling on to a person and then maybe you're on a boys trip and you guys just hang out in the hotel room and tell each other everything? I feel like I can assume no on that one, but maybe. But, again, I haven't ever, I don't know that many people who've been on a 7-month trip on a boat around the world with limited friends available. So maybe this is what develops. Well, when he wasn't hanging out with David and they weren't painting each other's nails and braiding each other's hair, he did do some work, Dicky did. At the very end of the trip, Dicky produced a film of maneuvers at sea, and that was actually used to facilitate the teaching of fleet maneuvers. And Halsey forwarded this film to the Admiralty, who adopted it. It became known as the Mountbatten System Maneuver Tuition and became a mainstay of naval training, so that's a feather in his cap. HMS Renown returned on October 11th. The 7-month trip had been a formative experience for the young naval officer. Not only had he forged a close friendship with his future king, but he had met a whole range of people and made connections that he would usefully later exploit. He had seen the world and had matured, learned how to meet and engage with crowds. Now all set for a sub-lieutenant's course at Portsmouth, he felt ready to settle down. All right, well, what of Edwina? What's going on with her? We left Edwina last time traipsing across Europe, ostensibly having this great cultural moment, but also meeting lots of boys. Back from her travels, no one knew what to do with Edwina. Her grandfather, Castle, aware of the difficult relationship with Molly, the evil stepmother, and lonely himself, suggested that Edwina come and live at Brooke House and act as his hostess. With the end of the war, he had begun to entertain more, and Edwina took on the role not only of companion, but working with his secretary, Stella Underhill, social secretary, responsible for table plans, invitations, and supervising the staff, not just at Brooke House, but at 6 Mile Bottom and Moulton Paddocks, his shooting and racing estates outside of Newmarket. I am astounded that she, as a teenager at this point, was able to be saddled with that kind of responsibility I mean, I know she was working with the secretary, but still responsible for table plans, invitations, supervising the staff, not just at Brookhouse, but 6 Mile Bottom and Moulton Paddock. I mean, that is a huge amount of responsibility. That training that she took in the art of domestic science, ding, 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 that's why she's using it. That's very useful information that she now has, and she's now capable of doing it. She was a natural. But it was an unexciting life for this teenager living alone with a man almost 50 years older. And really, quite frankly, much as he loved her, he was also very strict with her. And there was a lot of invasiveness to her privacy. You know, he felt, I think, that in order to keep his promise to his dead wife and his dead daughter, that he needed to really make sure that this granddaughter and daughter of theirs would be taken care of. And so he did a lot of like reading her mail and forbidding any meetings outside of the house and things like that. She always had to have a chaperone everywhere. There was a man named Charles Baring, 3 years her senior, who often saw her when both of them were staying in the south of France. And during the winter of 1920, he recalls a conversation where she talked very openly to him about her life and what she wanted from it. He remembered that she knew nothing at that time, but she did know that she was going to play some significant part in the world. She really had a great sense of destiny, but she didn't know what it was. Edwina, to everybody who saw her, said that she was charming and curious about the world, intelligent but still quite childlike without a mother to guide her. She had her coming out in May of 1920. It was a huge party, shared with Marjorie. It was held at Brookhouse. There was a black jazz band that played in the drawing room, and then a more traditional orchestra that played in the ballroom. And it was now widely recognized that she was one of the most beautiful debutantes of her year. She was intelligent, elegant, a good dancer, and a great conversationalist, so she had her choice of whoever she wanted. Through her grandfather, she had met Cornelius and Grace Vanderbilt, whose $100 million fortune derived from his grandfather's shipping and railroad interests. That summer, she stayed with Grace, 30 years older and a sort of substitute mother figure, in a house that they had taken for the summer. In August, she was with the Barings at their house in Cowes. Their daughter Poppy was a contemporary and a friend, from whence she watched the racing during the regatta from the Vanderbilt's yacht Sheila, before going on to stay with the Earl of Crawford in Fife. Oh, so she's really mixing with the people at this point, really hobnobbing. She was not short of admirers. In the autumn, Charlie Rise, an old Etonian who had won an MC with the Guards during the First World War, proposed while she was staying with his parents in Wales. And she intended to say yes, but then they sat down to breakfast, and that morning she looked at him and decided he looked like a frog. So she wasn't going to look at that face all her life, and she said no. Okay, now what of Dicky? Well, Edwina is turning down proposals due to people's frog-like appearance. Dicky spent the first 3 months of 1921 doing a sub-lieutenant's course at Portsmouth, coming top in navigation. He still had hopes for his relationship with Audrey, and in January they were united. He was head over heels for this girl, but you will recall that his friends told him, watch out for that one because she's sketchy as all get out. She's going to play you like a fiddle, boy, and she does. But he's over there just pitter-patter goes his heart. I had a marvelous 3 days in town with her, and I never could have believed that I was ever going to love one small woman so much, he wrote to his mother. Every time I see her, she's grown more wonderful. He saw her whenever he could, stayed the weekend with her and her sister near Guildford, seeing each other in London or in Portsmouth. Every time I see her, I feel more and more sure of myself, and she does too. Does she? He wrote to his mother at the end of January. There were plans for him to join her in Biarritz, where she was staying with a French family after his course finished, especially as there were doubts about whether the Prince of Wales' next tour, on which Dicky had been invited again, was actually going to go ahead. They were so into each other that marriage was like, in his mind, the next step. You know, like it's just, the problem is like when to have the marriage, but not if it's going to happen. And he writes to his mother and says, the Admiral does not seem at all sure about the Indian trip. If it does not come off, when shall we get married? He told his mother. Early next year, this winter is what Audrey and I would like because it's so much harder to have to wait so long when one is living in the same country. In April, he was sent to Liverpool in command of a platoon of naval stokers to deal with a threatened strike in the coal mines. It was at the end of June that Audrey finally told him where he stood. And it isn't going to be at the altar. She says how miserable she is. So he writes to his mother and says, Audrey says how miserable she is to have made me unhappy, and how she can't understand herself, and how she's lost faith in herself. She even said she wasn't good enough for me, he explained to his mother. Oh, Audrey, stop it. Audrey knew all along that she wasn't going to choose him. She's stringing that poor guy along. And then at the end of it being like, I know, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. It's not you. It's not. It's me. I mean, I don't even know how I can trust myself now that I could do that to you. I mean, it's so bad. I know. Oh, it sucks that I did this. I'm sorry. But I mean, it's just like, I can't let you keep thinking that this is a thing. I mean, you were really into it, and I love that for you. But it just feels like, I don't know, I feel like I'm not being true to myself. But like, I know it's really messed up that like I didn't say something sooner. I'm sorry. Like, you were talking about marriage and stuff, and I didn't know what to do about it. So I just didn't say anything yet. But like, I know I've lost faith in myself. Like, I should have said something sooner. I know. But I didn't. But anyway, I'm saying it now. So like, I'm sorry. He writes to his mother and says, he said, I've written back as nice a letter as I possibly could. It is hard to realize what we were to each other at one time, as she says in her letter, and to realize that all of that is over. I try to be philosophical about it and to realize that it's probably all for the best and that I was anyhow too young, but it is rather hard. Aw, he's brokenhearted. And why shouldn't he be? That girl lied to him and made him think that marriage was on the horizon when she was over there biding her time when she could slip in a word of, actually, no. All right, well, what of Edwina, though? What's she doing? She's still acting as her grandfather's hostess, and she's still running around the country visiting all the, fat cats. We get a whole list of them, basically all the most important people. She's over here partying like it's 1999 with Bertie, Duke of York, and Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, and all sorts of things. Now, of course, as one would expect, finally, she and Dicky are thrown together in the same circle of friends. So as it turns out, she was in Cowes and so was Dicky. And the book says that Dicky, who was still pining for Audrey, he's over there writing to people, I am really beginning to finally be able to forget about Audrey from time to time. But still, his heart's aching. Dicky runs into her because they were both invited by the Vanderbilts on their yacht, Venetia, in the hope that he might take an interest in their daughter, Grace. Their yacht? I thought their yacht was Sheila. I got they got two. Okay, well, he's not really into Grace, but he's into Edwina, who happens to be hanging around in the background. And he would continually run into her at social events throughout the week. She, too, was entranced. Dicky and Edwina actually had already met at a ball at Claridge's Hotel in October of 1920. Mountbatten later remembered this. He said, we got on extremely well. We had several dances, but nothing more followed. Dicky Mountbatten was not only virtually unknown to Edwina, but also quite unlike the young men that she did know, wrote Edwina's biographer. The thing is, Dicky was a wild card compared to some of the guys that she'd been seeing before. She'd spent the past year with admirers who wore +4s, tweed caps, and stout shoes. Dicky, keen and trim, always looked as if he were in uniform, as he often was. Other men played tennis. Mountbatten did acrobatics on the court. He was always on the move, turning somersaults on the deck of Venetia, shinnying up the rigging with his friend Dick Curzon. On a cloudy day with high waves, he would put on a rubber cap and a bathing suit and aquaplane on a flatboard towed behind a launch. He's over here having a good time. He's really, like they say, he was very much like a little boy in a lot of ways. High little boy energy, But what sealed the deal? At the end of the week, Dicky was due to stay with the Prince of Wales at his house in Dartmoor, and Edwina was meant to be joining her grandfather for a motor tour of France, but a better invitation was put forth. The Vanderbilt said, hey, we're going to go over here in our yacht and cruise over here by the coast of Belgium and northern France. Y'all want to come? And they're like, count us in. Sorry, grandfather. Sorry, Prince of Wales. Better invitations have come. So they hang out. Both Dicky, still regarded as a possible suitor for Grace, and Edwina were invited. And both seized their opportunity and gave their respective excuses to the heir of the throne, the millionaire. There's no doubt that it was on the cruise that we fell in love, Dicky later remembered. It was lovely weather, and we used to sit up in the deck chairs by moonlight holding hands, and we went ashore at each place and went to the local nightclub and had a very gay and amusing time. Who wouldn't fall in love with somebody under those circumstances, I ask you? Dicky's first action on his return was to take Edwina to meet his parents, then living near Southampton, though he was shocked to discover, when we went to catch the train to Southampton West, I found she had a third-class ticket, and I had a first-class ticket, so he paid for an upgrade. I should hope so. But of course she had a third-class ticket. That's the way Molly always made her travel. She probably didn't even conceive that there was another way she could go. Well, his parents were charmed. And they told him, Edwina is the most remarkable and charming girl of this generation that I have met. And Mountbatten later claimed that his father told him, "She's got intelligence, character, everything. Now you're really young, but if you do decide to marry her, you have my wholehearted approval. She'll make a wonderful wife for you." The two lovers arranged to meet again as soon as they could. The Repulse, with Dicky's father on board as a guest of its captain, Dudley Pound, was due in Inverness in mid-September. The Prince of Wales and Bertie were shooting at the Duke of Sutherland's Dunrobin Castle, 60 miles north, and Dicky arranged not only for him to join them, but also Edwina. It was probably their last chance to meet before he had to go with the Prince of Wales on a tour of India. But in Inverness, Dicky headed for Dunrobin to be united with Edwina, while his father, who'd caught a chill, took the night train from Inverness to London. It was a very large house party, which included Ronald Davidson, Archbishop of Canterbury. But the young couple had been partnered at tennis, and it promised to be a fun few days. "I spent most of the weekend in Edwina's company, and we were getting on like a house on fire," he later remembered, "and I had made up my mind to pop the question that last night of the weekend." But it was not to be. Things take a sudden turn for the worst here. Because you'll recall that the last chapter I was like, these two are just wandering through life with no tragedy whatsoever. The war didn't seem to touch them. Edwina's running all over Europe like there's not a war. Dicky's over here playing at being part of the Navy, but nothing's happening to him. Nobody's dying. Well, they're living a really nice life. Well, I spoke too soon, because tragedy is about to strike both of them, and it's the influenza that does it. On the second day of his stay, September 11th, Dicky received a telegram to be told that his father, the man he hero-worshipped, had had a heart attack following influenza. At the age of 67, he was dead. Dicky immediately returned to London to deal with the funeral arrangements, following 10 days later by Edwina. When she arrived at Brooke House, she discovered that a second tragedy had taken place. Sir Ernest had suffered a heart attack while at his desk in the library as she traveled back by train. He had never met the man that his beloved granddaughter wished to marry. Edwina's first thought was that she must see Dicky. Early the next morning, she sent a note to him at York House where he was staying. He arrived at noon and took her unchaperoned out of the house across the road in Hyde Park, where they walked and talked about the past and the future. They'd been thrown together in their mutual grief, and were now further brought together by others. Miss Ronnie Greville, a great matchmaker, invited them to stay at the same time at Polesden Lacey, whilst George and Nada Milford Haven had them for the first week in October at their home St. George in South Sea, along with Dicky's mother and two sisters. Dicky was due to sail in 3 weeks, but he felt it unfair to declare himself when he was about to disappear for 8 months. However, late one afternoon, the two young people found themselves alone in the billiard room. Deeply in love and emotionally drained by the events of the last 2 weeks, Dicky declared his love, and the two came to an understanding. Castle's death had changed Edwina's life in many ways, not least her financial position. He had left almost £7.5 million, that's over £300 in today's current values, with a 25/64 share to Edwina, which she would fully inherit when she married or on her 28th birthday, whichever was sooner. This left simply on bank deposit would give her a weekly income of £2,000 when the average was £2. The girl just fell in the lap of luxury. But concerns remained. Both of them were young and emotionally immature. Dicky on the rebound from Audrey and his father's death, and Edwina even keener with her grandfather's death to create the family unit that she had missed in her youth. And I will tell you, there's nothing like the loss of a significant... when I lost my mom, I was right about to get married. And I remember thinking, I just want to put this tragedy behind me. Not because I hadn't loved my mother and wanted to grieve for her. I couldn't bear the grief of it. And I just wanted to, get married and start my own family and, just try to find safety again. And it can really cloud your judgment about, is this the right time to get married or not? Because you just want to feel safe again. So I love that he says this because I think it's so true. She is in a very vulnerable position because she wants to create the family unit that she missed in her youth. That is so true. That is exactly what she would have been thinking at that time. There was also the huge disparity in their wealth and backgrounds. Dicky had his £310 a year naval pay, which was doubled by his private income. But it was nothing beside that of Edwina. In the circumstances given, Dicky was about to leave for 8 months, so the couple decided to keep quiet. And that is the end of that. But you guys, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. This book is bringing it. And I'm telling you, this is the tip of the iceberg. This is the tip of the iceberg. But I just love the way this author manages to gather all the things that you'd actually want to hear about. The interesting tidbits. A winner, if there ever was one, when it comes to writing some very interesting histories. All right, that's the end. I've got to go and make breakfast and get ready for school and all this and all that. But thank you all for hanging out with me again, and I will see you later this week. Bye.